The locker room smelled of chlorine and steam, and something older, the institutional kind of smell that soaks into tile grout over decades and never fully leaves. That becomes part of the place the way certain histories become part of places, absorbed and permanent, and not entirely visible until you know to look for it. Maya Calloway moved through the crowded space with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned long ago that the best way to go unnoticed was to belong everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Her red hair was dark against her skull, still wet from the morning's water training. Her freckled skin was flushed from the cold. She was small, 5'2", and bare feet, maybe 110 pounds, and she moved toward the shower stalls the way water moved around stone. Without effort, without announcement. She almost made it. Lily Hargrove turned the corner too fast, her visitor's pass swinging from her gym bag, her attention somewhere else entirely. The bag caught Maya's shoulder, not hard, just unexpected. And in that single unguarded second, the towel slipped. It caught at Maya's elbows, held there. 3 seconds that stretched considerably longer than 3 seconds had any right to. What Lily saw was not what she had expected to see. Around Maya's neck, on a simple ball chain, hung 2 sets of military dog tags. The first bore Maya's own information, standard issue. But above the name, above the service number and blood type, was the rank insignia. Lieutenant Commander, 04. United States Navy. The second set carried a different name, a different number, the same rank. Commander Sandra Reeves, KIAA, Syria, 2022. Lily had been a Navy yeoman for 4 years. She knew exactly what she was looking at. Her phone was already in her hand camera open from photographing the base for her parents back in Ohio. Her thumb pressed the shutter before her brain caught up to her reflexes. The sound it made was very small. Maya's eyes found Lily's face. Something moved behind those green eyes. Something that had nothing to do with a petite woman who had been struggling through basic training exercises all week. Something older. Something that had been places and carried the weight of having been there. Then it was gone. Maya tucked the tags back beneath the towel. She walked into the shower stall. She pulled the curtain closed. She said nothing at all. Lily stood in the steam and the fluorescent buzz, staring at the closed curtain, then at her phone. The photo was already uploading to the base's internal social network before she could stop it. Her caption was innocent. She had no idea what she had done. The screen cut to black. 72 hours earlier, the military transport bus ground through the late afternoon traffic on the Strand, heading south toward Coronado. The Pacific appeared and disappeared between buildings flat and silver and enormous, indifferent to the 25 people bouncing along inside who were trying very hard to look like they were not afraid. Maya pressed her forehead against the window glass. She was watching the ocean, but she was thinking about Sandra. Sandra Reeves had been 5'3" and looked, as she herself once put it, like someone's favorite aunt who happened to be able to field strip a rifle in 12 seconds. She had silver-streaked hair she kept in a regulation bun and laugh lines around her eyes that deepened when she was making a point she expected you to miss. Her voice never rose above a measured calm, regardless of what was happening around it. She had hands that could apply a tourniquet that would save a life, and she had a tactical mind that Maya, in 8 years of service, had encountered in its equal exactly once. Not one of the finest female minds she had encountered. One of the finest minds. Full stop. 2 years ago, Sandra Reeves died in Syria because a team leader named Brett Haskell decided her assessment of a building was, in his exact words, overly cautious. He used different language in the after-action report, but Maya had read both versions. She knew what he had meant. Sandra had been right about the building, right about the location of the charges, right about the timing. She died pulling 3 men from the rubble, including the man who had ignored her. Maya touched the dog tags through her shirt, hers and Sandra's together on the same chain. And behind them, flat against her sternum, a piece of paper folded into a square, small enough to be invisible, which she had been carrying since the day of Sandra's funeral. She had read it once the night she accepted this assignment. Once had been sufficient. She knew what it said. She had made a promise at that gravesite in Arlington. She intended to keep it. From 3 rows back, a voice carried over the engine noise and the low conversations of nervous people. "Look at that. Somebody put a high schooler on the wrong bus." Laughter moved through the bus like a small wave, easy and careless. Ryan Hargrove was 26 years old and built like a man who had spent his formative years absorbing tackles on behalf of a Division I football program. His arms pressed against the seams of his uniform. His voice was the kind that filled rooms without trying. He was not being cruel. He genuinely found the situation funny, the way people found things funny when they had not yet been asked to examine the assumptions underneath the humor. Administrative programs the other building. More laughter. The laughter of men who had not yet been tested and therefore believed that Suez was the primary currency of this particular world. Maya kept her forehead against the glass. She had heard every variation of this joke. Sandra used to say it was an advantage. Let them underestimate you. Let them think you do not belong. Then show them what you can do. Maya had believed that for years. She was less certain now. Because sometimes the underestimation was not just an advantage. Sometimes it was the thing that got people killed. The thing that let a team leader dismiss an accurate tactical assessment because accepting it would have required him to update a story he had been telling about what competence looked like. And she had watched what that cost. The bus pulled through the main gate of Naval Special Warfare Training Facility. Guard towers, American flags catching the ocean wind, buildings in neat rows against the California sky. In the distance, the Pacific stretched to the horizon, patient and cold, and entirely unimpressed by the occasion. Master Chief Warren Holt stood at the front of the reception area with the particular stillness of a man who had learned that movement was something you did with purpose or not at all. He was 52 years old with a face that 27 years of operational service and California sun had weathered into something that suggested geological processes more than aging. His chest carried enough decorations that new sailors sometimes lost count. His eyes held the assessment of a man who had spent 3 decades figuring out what people were made of before they knew themselves. He watched the bus unload. When his eyes found Maya Calloway, they stayed. He watched her step off the bus, watched her move to the formation line, watched the way she oriented herself, not searching, not uncertain, but placing herself in the space with the automatic competence of someone who had done this before. The oversized fatigue swam on her small frame. The boots were the smallest the supply depot had, and they were still too large. None of that was what Holt noticed. What he noticed was the way she stood. Not straight in the way that recruits stood straight, that was the point of formation. This was alignment, weight distributed with a precision that came from years of conditioning the body to hold itself in readiness without tension. The angle of her chin, the focus of her gaze on the middle distance, the way her hands rested at her sides without the micro-adjustments of someone managing anxiety. He had seen that before. He could not place it yet. He ran the formation through its opening speech, the one about this not being summer camp, about the failure rate, about the difference between wanting to be here and being able to be here, and he walked the line with the unhurried attention of a professional doing a professional job. When he reached Maya, he stopped. He looked at her for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes that was not quite the sympathy that small female candidates typically drew from well-meaning instructors, not quite the concern. Something more complicated. Miss, his voice dropped almost gentle. Are you certain you're in the correct program? Every head in the formation turned. Maya met his gaze and held it. Yes, Master Chief. SEAL prep is extremely demanding, physically, mentally, emotionally. There are other programs that might be more appropriate for someone of your, he paused, finding the diplomatic word, stature. I'm aware of the requirements, Master Chief. I'm here for SEAL prep. Something flickered in his eyes. He studied her for another moment. Then he nodded once, sharp and final, and continued down the line. Processing took 2 hours. Medical checks and gear issue, and the endless conversion of human beings into data points. The supply sergeant looked at Maya's frame and produced the expression of a man asked to solve an equation with missing variables. Smallest we have, he said, extending fatigues that needed to be rolled at the cuffs and belted twice at the waist. That works, Maya said. She tucked the fatigues under her arm with the automatic efficiency of someone who had been issued ill-fitting equipment in the field and learned to make it work. The sergeant watched her do this and said nothing more because the movement told him something he was not sure how to categorize, and he was a practical man who dealt in categories. Barracks B held 20 recruits in 2 rows of metal bunks. Maya was assigned a lower bunk near the back wall next to a woman who introduced herself the way former law enforcement always did, directly with eye contact, extending a hand and watching the handshake. Dana Mercer, Boston PD 6 years, SWAT for the last 2. Maya Calloway. The handshake was brief. Dana's grip tested slightly. Maya matched it exactly. No more, no less. I'm going to say something, Dana said, and I mean it with no disrespect. Go ahead. I've done Police Academy SWAT certification and a joint training the exercise with FBI Tactical Response. The dropout rate here is higher than any of those combined. I'm not saying that to discourage you. I'm saying it because I'd rather be honest than polite. Maya began unpacking her gear. Every item went into the wall locker in exactly the right position. Socks folded in thirds. shirts pressed flat with collars aligned, boots heel to heel with laces tucked inside. The movements were not careful in the way of someone trying to remember instructions from a manual. They were automatic, worn smooth by years of repetition until they had moved below the level of conscious thought into something more fundamental. Dana watched this with the quiet attention of a trained investigator, cataloging details whose significance she had not yet determined. The speed was one thing, the accuracy was another. What she was actually seeing was not performance. It was the kind of automaticity that belonged to a different category of person than the category this woman was supposed to occupy. "Where did you serve?" Dana asked quietly. "I haven't. Not yet." Dana did not believe this. She did not push. Not yet. Some information came out in its own time, and pressing early only taught people to hide it better. The mess hall at 1800 hours was loud with the specific energy of people trying not to show how frightened they were. Long tables full of voices pitched slightly too high, stories offered slightly too readily. Ryan Hargrove held court at the center table. He talked about his grandfather, Colonel Raymond Hargrove, who had done 2 tours in Vietnam and come back carrying something he never entirely put down and who still had his medals in a case on the living room wall. He talked about his father, who had done 2 tours in the Gulf War and then spent 20 years telling his son never to join the military. Ryan had joined anyway. 3 generations, he said. He was here to prove he belonged in the line. Marcus Briggs sat nearby, quieter, letting the conversation wash around him. He had tattoos that ran from his wrist to his collar, the accumulated decisions of 15 years of construction work in Boston. When someone asked his background, he said he had dropped out of high school and swung hammers for a decade and a half and was here to prove his value was not determined by a degree he did not have. He said this without apology, without the defensive edge that usually accompanied it. Just the flat statement of a man who had made his peace with his history. At the far end of the room, a young man named Garrett Pierce sat alone, not because he was unfriendly, but because whatever was behind his eyes was not entirely in this room. 23 years old, lean build, beach, darkened skin, the look of someone who had spent years reading the ocean. There was grief in him that he had not yet learned to carry invisibly, the way grief sat in people when it was still too new and too specific for the general posture of resilience. Maya sat at a corner table with a view of the entire room. She ate and watched. She took note of who talked and who listened and who was watching the watchers. She noted Ryan's gravitational pull, the way people oriented toward him without realizing it. She noted Dana's careful positioning, always with a wall behind her. She noted Marcus's stillness, which was not the stillness of a passive man, but of a patient one. She noted Garrett and filed the specific quality of his grief for later consideration. "Hey," Ryan's voice aimed across the mess hall. Not hostile, just the easy reach of a man who had spent his life taking up space. "You sure you can handle the PT? Maybe someone made an administrative error." Laughter rippled through the tables. Maya looked up from her tray. She looked at Ryan with eyes that were completely calm. She took a sip of water. She set the cup down. "I'll manage," she said, 2 words, said without heat, without irony, without the need to prove anything in that moment. The economy of someone who had stopped expending energy on this particular transaction a long time ago. Something in Ryan's expression shifted just slightly. Not much, just enough that a few people at his table noticed. There was a quality to her composure that did not quite fit with her appearance, a stillness that suggested depth rather than surface. Dana, sitting nearby, filed it away. Lights out came at 10 o'clock. The barracks settled into uneasy quiet. Maya lay in her bunk and listened to the conversations die away into sleep. She could hear Ryan talking in low tones about his grandfather's letters from Vietnam, still in a shoebox in his parents' closet, written in the particular handwriting of a man trying to be careful and honest simultaneously about things that were neither careful nor honest to experience. She could hear Marcus quiet in his bunk, not sleeping, either enduring the dark with the patience of a man who had spent years doing hard work in uncomfortable conditions. She touched the dog tags through her shirt, hers and Sandra's, and the folded paper flat behind them. Sandra's voice came to her the way it always did in these hours, not as memory exactly, but as presence. Clear and measured. "You are not here to be better than them. You are here to show what better looks like so they understand they have been measuring wrong." Maya had been the youngest woman to complete Bud/S training, though that was not a record she discussed. 6 years ago, she had made SEAL Team 3. 3 years ago, she had been promoted to lieutenant commander. She had worked in environments she was not permitted to discuss with most people she knew. She had made decisions under fire that she carried in the particular quiet way such decisions were carried, which was not heroically but steadily, as part of the cost. She was 28 years old and had already seen more than most people saw in a lifetime. And she was lying in a barracks bunk listening to a 26-year-old former football player talk about a shoebox of letters in his parents' closet. Sandra would have said, pay attention to that. That is the thing underneath the jokes on the bus and the bravado in the mess hall. That is what you are actually dealing with, not malice. A story told so many times and so consistently that the people telling it did not know they were telling it. They thought they were just seeing clearly. You could not argue someone out of a story. You had to show them a different one. That was why Maya was here. That and because Sandra deserved something more than a corrected after-action report. Across the base in an office that smelled of old coffee and too many late nights, Master Chief Warren Holt sat at his desk and stared at the name on the roster. Callaway Maya. He pulled out his phone and sent a message to Captain Elena Shaw. Something odd about one of the new recruits. Recommend additional background check. The response came back in 4 minutes. Background is need to know. Continue training as normal. Do not single out for additional scrutiny. Holt set the phone down. In 27 years of service, need to know had a specific meaning. It meant the information existed. It meant someone had decided he should not have it. And it meant whatever was being protected was significant enough to protect. He leaned back in his chair and thought about Little Creek. Naval Amphibious Base 2008, a joint training exercise. He had been a senior instructor then running new operators through advanced water training. Sandra Reeves had been there as an observer evaluating methodology, officially learning everything she could in practice. Because Sandra Reeves did not do anything without understanding it completely first. He had watched her remove her boots that afternoon by the pool. A small thing, mundane. Sandra had a specific technique unlacing the left boot with 3 precise pulls, removing it with a slight inward rotation to protect the ankle, setting it exactly parallel to the wall before beginning on the right. Efficient in a way that revealed years of doing it in darkness, in haste, in conditions where small details were the difference between operational and non-operational. He had watched Maya Callaway remove her boots in the supply depot today. Left boot, 3 pulls, inward rotation. Parallel to the wall, not similar, identical. You did not develop a specific movement pattern from the same instructor by coincidence. You developed it because the same person had drilled it into you over the same years in the same conditions until it lived below conscious thought. He knew who she was. He was not wrong about this. 27 years of reading people had built something in him that did not misfire on details this specific. He picked up his phone and sent a second message. Not to Shaw this time, to a number he had not used in 8 months. He did not know for certain that Haskell had been alerted, did not know who had seen Shaw's background check request, or who else in the administrative chain had access to the incoming evaluation roster, or how far that information might have traveled in the 12 hours since she arrived. He did not know any of this with certainty, but he had been in the Navy long enough to understand how information moved through a system when the system was protecting something. He typed, Brett, if you've heard anything about what's happening here, this isn't the right time for a visit. He set the phone down and waited. The response came back in 11 minutes. I'll be there in the morning. Holt looked out his window at the barracks where the lights had gone off. At the dark building where 25 people were trying to sleep before the hardest weeks of their lives. He thought about Sandra Reeves in 2008, removing her boots by the pool and then walking into the water and demonstrating a technique that had made him stop and look twice. He thought about what he had known since this afternoon and what he had chosen to do with it. He told himself it was professional judgment. The evaluation needed to be clean. His job was to run the training and let the administrative process work itself out. He sat with that for a long moment. Then he closed the roster file without adding any note, and he turned off his desk lamp and he looked at the dark building one more time before he went home. He had been living with certain things for 2 years. He was not sure he was done paying for them. 4:30 arrived without ceremony. Holt came through the barracks door with a metal can lid and enough volume to constitute a minor seismic event. 2 minutes to formation. Anyone not in proper uniform with boots laced would begin their day with push-ups, and he could promise that was not how they wanted to begin their day. The barracks erupted into controlled chaos. Maya was already awake. She had been awake for 5 minutes, lying still while her body completed its final rest cycle. She was dressed and laced in 85 seconds and standing by her bunk while people around her were still trying to determine which arm went in which sleeve. Dana noticed she had been watching since the night before, and this confirmed what she had already begun to suspect. The speed was one thing, the accuracy was another. What she was seeing was not performance under pressure. It was automaticity, the body executing a procedure it had executed so many times that it no longer required supervision from the mind. Where did you learn to move like that? Dana asked quietly as they headed for the door. Practice, Maya said. In the tone of someone giving the true answer to a question they had been asked many times by people who were not yet ready for the complete answer. Dana understood that this answer meant something specific. She did not push. Not yet. The 5-mile run began at first light, Holt setting a pace designed not to destroy them on day one, but to identify who had prepared and who had assumed that prior athleticism was the same as operational conditioning. These were different things. Many people learned this distinction for the first time on this road, and the learning was not comfortable. Ryan Hargrove discovered on mile 3 that the cardiovascular demands of sustained distance running were not covered by college football conditioning. His face moved through a progression of colors. His technique deteriorated in the specific way that happened when the body began rationing resources, shutting down non-essential systems. Maya ran in the middle of the pack, holding exactly the pace required to stay with the average performers. Her breathing was controlled and rhythmic, 4 counts in 4 hold, 4 out, 4 hold, the box breathing technique that was standard for extended exertion when you needed to maintain cognitive function alongside physical output. She had run distances that made this look like a warm-up. The challenge was making it look like it was not easy. The calibration required more discipline than the running. She moved closer to Ryan at mile 4, matched his deteriorating pace without making the matching obvious. Listen, she said quietly. Same concept I'm about to teach in the water. Small circular movement in the legs. Alternate, again. Let them do the work instead of fighting for it. Upper body relaxed, arms barely moving. You are burning fuel on big movements you cannot afford. Ryan looked at her sideways with the expression of an exhausted man being surprised. He tried the adjustment. His body found something closer to a sustainable rhythm. How are you not practice, she said. He almost smiled despite everything. He understood that this answer meant something specific even if he could not yet say what. The run concluded on the parade ground in the early morning light. Holt, who had led from the front the entire time and appeared entirely unaffected, called them to attention with the flat efficiency of a man who considered this a reasonable beginning to a day. 30 minutes to shower and breakfast. Then the obstacle course. That is where we find out who has technical skill and who has been substituting determination for preparation. They are not the same thing. Determination is necessary. It is not sufficient. His eyes moved across the formation, found Maya's for a fraction of a second. Dismissed. The obstacle course sprawled across 2 acres of carefully designed punishment rope. Climbs of wall scaling, cargo nets, balance beams, low crawls through mud. Each station calibrated to break people who relied on single strengths rather than comprehensive fitness. Gunnery Sergeant Roy Kavanaugh ran the hand-to-hand combat portion, a lean former Force Recon Marine who moved with the economy of someone who had long since stopped needing to prove anything and had arrived at the quiet efficiency on the other side of that. He paired Maya with Dana for defensive scenarios. What happened next took 2.7 seconds and produced complete silence in the training area. Maya's counter from a rear chokehold was textbook SEAL Level 3, close quarters combat, the kind of technique that required hundreds of hours of mat time to execute at that speed and precision. Dana tapped out from the mat, looking up at the sky with an expression that was pure professional shock. Where did you learn to move like that? Dana asked, still on her back. I had a good instructor, Maya said. Kavanaugh stepped onto the mat with the expression of a professional whose expertise had just identified something that should not exist in this context. Miss Calloway, that was not self-defense class technique. That was SEAL close quarters combat curriculum. The specific counter you used is not taught to civilians. Maya met his gaze and said nothing. Kavanaugh studied her for a long moment. Then he said, maybe you can help some of the others with their technique. It was a dismissal and an acknowledgement simultaneously. He had seen what she could do. He had identified what it meant. He was choosing for now to let it sit. But everyone had seen. And the easy dismissal of the bus, the careless laughter, those were not available anymore. Something had replaced them that was more complicated and considerably more useful. Respect mixed with suspicion. Curiosity mixed with unease. That evening, Holt's phone sat on his desk face up. At 2200, as the barracks went dark, he received a notification. A photograph was spreading through base social media, taken that morning in the women's locker room, a blur of red hair and the unmistakable gleam of commander-level dog tags. The caption was innocent. The implications were not. He enlarged the image. He already knew who it was. He had known since the supply depot. What the photo meant was that the timeline had compressed. What he had hoped to manage over days was now a matter of hours. He set the phone down and looked at the ceiling for a long time. The pool facility at Naval Special Warfare Training held a particular quality of silence in the early morning, running water flat, and blue-green under industrial lights, chlorine mixing with salt air through the open doors facing the ocean. Everything about the space suggested it had been designed not for comfort, but for the systematic removal of illusions. Chief Isaac Tanner stood at the pool's edge when the recruits filed in. He explained the 3 phases without embellishment: 30 minutes treading water in full gear, 40 pounds of weight, 62-degree water, hypothermia, onset around minute 20. Underwater navigation through a course that included 6 hoops at varying depths, 3 obstacles, a zero-visibility tunnel, and object retrieval from 15 feet, 10 minutes, no exceptions. Rescue simulation paired 1 drowning victim, 1 rescuer. Historical failure rate for the complete sequence, 42%. He said this the way he said everything. Without drama. The water would do the rest. Phase 1 began at 8:30. The recruits entered the water and the cold found them immediately. 62 degrees made its intentions known. Not extreme cold, but cold enough to matter. Cold enough to require active management rather than passive endurance. Maya maintained her position with the egg beater kick, small, circular movements of her legs alternating in controlled rhythm. Her upper body held nearly still. She had used this technique in water considerably colder than this for considerably longer than 30 minutes in conditions that made a training pool look like a spa. The challenge was not the water. The challenge was calibrating how comfortable to look. Tanner walked the pool perimeter. His eyes kept returning to Maya's position the way experienced instructors' eyes returned to things that did not add up. At minute 12, the first recruit was pulled by safety divers. At minute 18, Ryan Hargrove was deep in negotiation with the physics of his own body. His linebacker build is so advantageous on land was now working against him with methodical efficiency. Muscle mass required oxygen. His technique was failing the way technique failed when the body had stopped having enough left over to maintain it. Maya moved closer, not touching, not violating any rule. "You already know this," she said quietly. Not the voice of instruction, the voice of a reminder. Same concept from the run, remember. Ryan found her in his peripheral vision. His face was the red-gray color of a man several minutes past comfortable, but something in his eyes registered the reference, the technique she had given him on a road in the morning dark, translated now from land to water by the body that had stored it. He found the rhythm, not clean, not effortless, but survivable. At minute 22, Marcus Briggs was in genuine trouble at the far end of his zone. His pride, the pride of a man who had spent 15 years proving himself through physical endurance, was the last thing between him and the safety diver. Maya raised her voice just enough to carry the distance. "Marcus, vertical position, stop fighting, let the water work with you." He heard her. He did the calculation that drowning people did between pride and survival. He adjusted. Not elegant, not textbook, but enough. At minute 30, 18 recruits climbed out. 7 had failed. Ryan and Marcus dragged themselves to the edge, utterly spent but successful. They both looked at Maya with the specific expression of people updating a fundamental assumption. She pulled herself out of the water with movements that showed no fatigue. Her breathing was elevated the appropriate amount for 30 minutes of sustained physical activity and nothing more. Tanner watched her climb out. His jaw was working in the specific way of a man whose professional expertise had just been comprehensively overturned. Phase 2 was where the pool showed you what you were made of in the dark. Cole Bridger completed the navigation course in 6:45. Ryan barely made it at 9:52. Dana posted 7:30. Marcus came through at 9:15 on determination alone. When Maya's turn came, Tanner stood beside her with his stopwatch and the expression of a man who had made a professional judgment and was waiting to see whether he was correct. She entered the water with barely a displacement. Her body cut through the surface and went immediately to depth, moving with combat swimmer stroke, the specific military variant that generated maximum forward movement with minimum effort and minimum drag. Not recreational diving form, not competitive swimming form. Military form executed at a level that required years of specific conditioning. She moved through the course without hesitation. First hoop, second, third, the wall penetration, the cargo net, the pipe crawl. She disappeared into the darkened section. Tanner watched his stopwatch. 1 minute, 1:40, 2 minutes, 2:30. She emerged from the darkness at 2:40, her trajectory carrying her directly to the retrieval target at 15 feet, and she surfaced at 3 minutes 47 seconds. The pool area was silent. Tanner looked at his stopwatch the way a man looked at something that had personally disappointed him. 3:47. He had instructors who could not do that. He was looking at a recruit candidate in an oversized wetsuit who had just posted a time that belonged in a different category entirely, and she was standing at the pool edge waiting for whatever came next with the patience of someone who had been waiting for whatever came next for a very long time. He opened his mouth, and then he noticed the figure standing behind the observation glass at the far end of the facility. Brett Haskell had been standing there for 40 minutes. Maya had known he was there since minute 3 of Phase 1. She had registered him the way she registered everything in her operational environment without looking directly cataloging the threat, returning attention to the work. She did not look at him now, but she felt the weight of his attention, and it was not the weight of professional assessment. Tanner called the 10-minute break without completing the sentence he had started. Phase 3 was rescue simulation, and it revealed things the earlier phases could not reach. When Maya executed the cross-chest carry and towed Marcus to the wall with smooth, powerful strokes that barely disturbed the surface, he stopped his simulated panic, not because the rules required it, but because something in her grip, in her voice, and the absolute certainty of her movements cut through his performance and reached something real. She said, "I've got you. Stop fighting me. I will not let you go. Trust me. Breathe." And the part of Marcus that had nearly drowned 45 minutes earlier heard that and believed it. When they switched and Marcus attempted to rescue Maya, something instructive happened. Her simulation was so technically accurate, panic executed with the authenticity of someone who had pulled real people from real water, that Marcus found himself making errors he should not have been making, his training brain engaging with the simulation as though it were real, and discovering that his technique had gaps. He got her to the wall. He climbed out, breathing harder than the effort required. "She just taught me more about what not to do," he said to no one in particular, than everything in the briefing. The observation glass was empty when Phase 3 concluded. Haskell was gone. Tanner noticed this. His face showed the expression of a man who was beginning to understand the shape of something he had not previously had enough information to see. Evening came with the cooling of the air off the water. Ryan found Maya outside the barracks as the light went flat and gold over the Pacific. He stood next to her for a moment without speaking, looking at the ocean the way men sometimes looked at something large and indifferent before saying something they had been carrying. "My grandfather," he said finally, "Colonel Raymond Hargrove. He was at a memorial service in 2022, a ceremony for a female SEAL officer." Maya was still. "He called me that night. He's 78 years old and he did not cry easily, and his voice was not entirely steady when he called. He said she was the finest officer he had encountered in 40 years of watching people serve. He said she was right about everything and nobody listened." Ryan paused. He said the person standing next to her casket looked like she was swallowing fire and refusing to let it show. The ocean moved in its slow, constant way. "I saw you help me this morning in the pool. I saw you help Marcus. You did not have to do either of those things. They were not in your interest." He stopped. "I just want you to know that I understand something about why you are here. I do not know all of it, but I understand something." He paused. "And I am sorry about what I said on the bus." Maya looked at the water. "Your grandfather sounds like a man worth carrying forward," she said. She went inside. Ryan stood there for another minute thinking about the shoebox of letters in his parents' closet and the man who had written them and the woman who had just walked away, and he began slowly with the difficulty of genuinely revising something you believed without knowing you believed it, to reassemble his understanding of what he was doing here. Across the base, Holt sat in his office and thought about what he had chosen not to do. He thought about the supply depot, the boots, the specific technique that belonged to one person he had known 17 years ago, and to the woman who had been trained by that person and had internalized her methods until they lived in the body rather than the mind. He had recognized this, and he had said nothing, and he had told himself it was professional judgment. He sat with that for a long time. Then he went home, and the night passed, and morning came with the rescue call. The call came in at 17:30. A civilian fishing vessel, the Marigold, had capsized approximately 2 miles offshore. 4 people aboard. Coast Guard 40 minutes out. Weather deteriorating, swells building to 6 feet, water temperature 58 degrees. 2 victims visible on debris. 2 presumed trapped under the inverted hull. Admiral Charles Bennett authorized the deployment. Captain Elena Shaw delivered the briefing to Holt, who was already moving before she finished. He found Maya in the equipment room and said 3 words. Tactical command, you. She was already pulling on the rescue wetsuit properly fitted because she had brought her own when the recruits arrived at the dock and saw her. Not the Maya they had been training alongside. Not the recruit candidate in the oversized fatigues who said, "I'll manage in practice," and smiled at nothing. They saw a woman in fitted operational gear moving with a command presence that changed the architecture of the space she occupied. They saw Tanner briefing her as the senior officer. They saw Holt standing to the side in the posture of someone deferring. Dana understood first, the expression of a trained investigator arriving at a correct answer. Ryan understood second, confirmation of what he had already known, the gap between suspicion and certainty, closing with a finality that was almost physical. Marcus looked at her and then looked at Holt and then looked back at her and said nothing. Because there are moments when silence is not passivity, but the only appropriate response to the scale of what you have just understood. Garrett Pierce stood apart and watched Maya with eyes that were doing something the other's eyes were not. He was not calculating. He was recognizing. The way she moved. The way she checked her equipment with the automatic precision of someone who had checked it thousands of times in circumstances where checking it was not preparation, but survival. His brother Daniel had moved like that. Daniel had talked about the people who moved like that. Garrett had spent 3 years trying to become what Daniel had been trying to become, and now he was looking at the real thing. The boat left the dock. Haskell stood at the end of the pier and watched it go. The water at 58 degrees made its decision known immediately. Not extreme, not the Arctic conditions of advanced training, but cold enough to matter in ways that accumulated quickly, that worked on the body with the patient efficiency of a force that did not need to hurry because it had already won every negotiation it had ever entered. Maya reached the first visible victim in under 2 minutes. A man in his 50s, hypothermic, lips already blue at the edges, eyes unfocused in the way that indicated cold working on the brain. She secured the flotation collar with the cross-chest carry, protected his airway, held him against the swells, and signaled the boat. While the crew pulls him aboard, she was already moving toward the second visible victim. A teenage boy panicking in the way that drowning victims panicked, spending everything he had on movements that were actively working against his survival. She came in from behind, wrapped her arm across his chest, said the words. His panic collapsed against the certainty in her grip and her voice. The inverted hull sat low in the water. 2 people below, air pockets depleting, cold working inward, time running in one direction only. She took 3 measured breaths and went down. The world under the hull was disoriented in the specific way that inverted spaces were disorienting, floor above surface below the geometry of the vessel, requiring reconstruction before navigation was possible. She moved through this with the methodical precision of someone who had trained in submerged structures until the reconstruction happened at the speed of reflex. She found the air pocket at the helm station, a woman in her 40s with an arm at an angle that told the story of a fracture. An elderly man with a head wound, whose eyes were doing something that suggested the line between conscious and not, was moving in the wrong direction. 3 dives. 18 minutes. Both brought up. When Maya surfaced the final time, 4 victims were alive. The Coast Guard helicopter arrived as the boat turned for shore. Tanner said nothing for a long moment. Then, "Commander." The word arrived with a weight that had nothing to do with formality. It was the weight of a professional, acknowledging that he had missed what he should have seen, and that missing it had a name. "You saw performance data that didn't fit your frame," Maya said. "That's not a personal failure. That's the thing I'm here to understand." The dock was crowded when the boat came in, 15 recruits standing in the last light. Ryan spoke first. "You're a SEAL," he said. "Not a question." Maya stepped onto the dock and stood in front of them, and she was wet and cold and tired in the specific way that serious work made you tired, and she looked at 15 people who had trusted her as a peer, and she made the decision she had known was coming. She told them her name, her rank, her years of service, why she was here. She told them about Sandra Reeves, not the official version, the real one. Dana was angry, the specific anger of someone who had opened up, had told things she did not tell readily, and now understood that the context in which she had told them was not what she had believed. The anger was legitimate, and Maya did not minimize it. Ryan's face had moved through several things and arrived somewhere that was not anger. He had known something. The knowing had prepared him. Marcus was still, processing completely without performance. Garrett Pierce looked at her and then walked a few steps apart and stood with his back to the water and his arms crossed, doing what he had been doing since the first day, carrying something that had not yet found its resolution. The argument from Haskell came from the end of the dock where he had been standing since the boat returned. This is an unauthorized disclosure of classified evaluation information. Frank Doherty's voice arrived from somewhere to Maya's left. Unhurried. Absolute. The voice of a man who had been in the Navy since before Haskell was in high school. Brett, he said, Admiral Bennett's office. Now. It was not a request. Haskell looked at Maya. His face was doing something that was not anger, or not only anger, something older and more complicated, the face of a man carrying weight he had been carrying for 2 years without finding anywhere to set it down. He walked off the dock. The recruits were given 12 hours to decide whether to continue. They dispersed slowly. Maya stayed on the dock alone. She reached into the inside pocket of the rescue suit and found the folded paper she had been carrying since Sandra's funeral. She opened it in the dock light. Sandra's handwriting. Precise and even. If you are reading this, it means you went back in. Good. Now keep going. The system is not the people. The people can be reached. That is the work. She folded it back along its original creases. She heard footsteps. Holt sat down on the dock beside her, not across from her. Beside her, looking at the same water. He was quiet for a long time. The kind of quiet that had something specific in it, the quality of a man who had decided to say a thing and was measuring the distance between the decision and the saying. I knew who you were, he said. From the first day. The ocean moved. The way you removed your boots in the supply depot. Sandra had a specific technique. Left boot 3 pulls inward rotation. You did it exactly. I trained alongside her at Little Creek in 2008, 17 years ago, and I still saw it. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the water. I told myself I kept quiet because the evaluation needed to be clean. Because my job was to run the training and let the administrative process work itself out. I told myself I was being professional. A pause. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. Maya waited. Part of me hoped you would fail, Holt said. Not because I wanted you to fail, because if you failed, nothing had to change. No reports, no reckoning. No one had to look at what happened in Syria and ask what the institution allowed. No one had to look at me and ask what I knew and when I knew it. The water below the dock was black and still between swells. I chose my comfort over doing right by you. I knew who you were and what you were here for, and I chose the easier thing. He stopped. That is not the Master Chief I have spent 27 years trying to be. Maya looked at the folded paper in her hand. She knew you didn't fully believe in her, she said. Sandra, she told me once that there were people in the system who understood intellectually that she was capable, but couldn't make themselves feel it. Couldn't make it sit right alongside everything they'd been taught about what capability looked like. Holt said nothing. She didn't stop working with them, Maya said. She didn't reassign the weight of that onto them. She just kept doing the work. That makes it work, I know. They sat in the dark for a moment. There is something else, Holt said, about the Syria report. He was careful now, measuring each word. Brett Haskell made the tactical decision that killed Sandra. That is real. He carries that. But the report, the official version, the one that cleared him and buried hers, Haskell did not write it. He was pressured. The man above him in the chain of command, the man who subsequently approved his promotion, rewrote the report and presented it to Haskell as the alternative to ending his career. Haskell accepted all that. He has been living with it. That doesn't absolve him. No, it doesn't. But it means what you're trying to change is not one man. Haskell is the visible part of something that goes further than one bad decision in one building in Syria. Maya looked at Sandra's note. The system is not the people. The people can be reached. The person who rewrote that report, she said, retired 18 months ago with Fuller's honors, currently advising 3 Senate subcommittees on special operations policy. The dock moved slightly in the water the way things moved when connected to something much larger than themselves. Tomorrow, Haskell will try to shut down the evaluation, she said. Yes. You'll support the evaluation. It was not a question. Holt looked at her for the first time since he had sat down. The look of a man who had decided who he was going to be, having spent too long deciding something else. Yes, he said. They sat in the dark until the base lights reflecting in the water were the only lights there were, and somewhere in the barracks buildings 15 people were lying awake with their 12-hour decision, and in a room at the edge of the base, Brett Haskell was staring at the ceiling, running the same calculation he had been running for 2 years without arriving at a different answer. Maya stood. Sandra used to say the mission matters, but the individual lives matter more, she said. When you have to choose, choose life. She looked at Holt. Tomorrow we choose what this is going to be. She walked off the dock. Holt remained sitting with the ocean and 17 years of a small, specific movement and everything it meant and the choice he had made an hour ago that he understood was going to cost something and that he was prepared to pay. The 12 hours passed with the weight of hours that carried something real in them. Maya sat at the small desk in the women's barracks section and wrote notes, the observations, the data points, the documented evidence of bias presenting and persisting and beginning finally to bend. The writing was meticulous. It was the work she had come here to do, and she did it with total attention. Around 4 in the morning, she stopped writing. She thought about Garrett Pierce. She had read his file before she came here, part of her preparation. She had also read his brother's file, Daniel Pierce, 24 years old at the time of his death. Hell Week 3 years ago, the official cause was cardiac arrest. The official record called it an unpredictable event, a medical anomaly that could not have been foreseen. What the official record did not contain was the note from the reviewing physician filed in a supplementary document that required 2 levels of clearance, stating that the presentation was consistent with hypertrophic cardiomyopathy in the obstructive form, and that updated screening protocols were recommended. The updated screening protocols had not been implemented. And Garrett Pierce, based on the supplementary genetic risk data in his own enrollment physical data that had been flagged and then not followed through on, carried a statistically significant probability of the same condition. She found him at 5:15 sitting on the steps at the rear of the barracks building, looking at a photograph. She had known he would be there. She had learned where people went to be alone in the hours before their decisions became final. She sat on the step beside him without preamble. Daniel, she said. He turned the photograph slightly. A young man on a beach laughing at something off camera. The resemblance to Garrett was clear in the jawline and the way he held his shoulders. He would have been good at this, Garrett said. He had everything it required. He could read water the way other people read text. He could stay calm in conditions that made other people panic. He paused. He did not fail. I want you to know I know that, whatever the official record says. He did not fail, Maya said. He had a heart condition the standard screening did not catch. He collapsed during log PT on day 4 of Hell Week. The medical team was on scene in 90 seconds, but the damage was already complete. There was nothing to be done after that point. She paused. That is not the official account. The official account is a careful version of the same truth, but the part about him not failing, that part is accurate. Garrett closed his eyes, held them closed, opened them. 3 years, he said. 3 years I thought about whether he quit, whether the stories we told about who we were had put something on him heavier than the training, whether I needed to finish it to prove that we were not people who stopped. You are not that kind of people, Maya said, and he did not stop. He sat with that for a moment that was long and quiet and necessary. There is something else, Maya said. She told him about the flag in his enrollment physical, calm, clear, without softening it. She told him what the supplementary genetic data indicated and what it meant in the context of the training he was attempting. She told him the flag had not been followed through on and that this was a failure of process she had already documented. She told him that completing this program was not the way to finish what Daniel had started, that finishing what Daniel had started meant being alive to do it. Garrett was quiet for a long time. The sky was lightening over the hills, the dark going gray at the edges. He would have pulled me out, Garrett said finally. If he had known and I was the one doing this, he would have sat right here and told me to stop. Yes, Maya said. I know that. I've known it for a while. He looked at the photograph. I just needed someone to say it who wasn't afraid of disappointing me. He stood up, slid the photograph back into the left chest pocket of his uniform where it would stay. I'll talk to the medical officer this morning, he said. He looked at her. Thank you for knowing about Daniel. Thank you for telling me the truth about what happened to him. He deserved to be remembered correctly, Maya said. Garrett walked back inside. Maya stayed on the steps as the light continued building and the ocean worked its way into visibility at the edge of the base perimeter, and she thought about what Sandra had written on the paper she kept flat against her sternum. The system is not the people. The people can be reached. By 0714 of the 15 remaining recruits had confirmed they were staying. They showed up to morning formation with the quality of people who had made a decision in full knowledge of its cost. Something had shifted. The easy hierarchies of the first days, the physical comparisons, the performance posturing, had been replaced by something more serious and less comfortable and considerably more useful. The morning brought land navigation training in the hills behind the base And it was in those hills that the second rescue call came. Two recruits from a separate cohort had not returned from a night navigation exercise. Last known position was a 2-square-mile grid in the chaparral and oak scrub on the back slope. One was reporting a suspected broken leg. Weather was moving in from the northwest. The base search and rescue team was 40 minutes from deployment readiness. The lost recruits did not have 40 minutes. Maya briefed her cohort in 90 seconds. Two-person teams grid search pattern radio check every 5 minutes. Anyone finds anything, they report immediately and wait for team consolidation before moving the casualty. Medical pack with Ryan, communications with Dana, Doherty coordinating from high ground. She assigned Haskell to her own position. Not as courtesy, because she wanted him where she could see him. The chaparral was dense and wet from the previous night's marine layer. Footing unstable where the clay had absorbed moisture. Light under the tree canopy, the flat gray-green of early morning in coastal scrub. Maya moved with Haskell 5 yards to her right, and they swept their sector without speaking, calling out periodically, the radio connecting them to the other teams whose voices came back clipped and professional. At the 40-minute mark, Dana's voice clothing fibers on an outcrop. Fresh, converging. They found the 2 missing recruits in a shallow drainage 12 minutes later. One with a fractured tibia visible through torn fabric, hypothermia, beginning its patient work. The other sitting beside him in the mud, holding his hand in a grip that had probably not loosened in hours. Ryan moved in with the medical pack without being told. He worked with the precise and genuine care of someone who had discovered that what he knew had found its proper application. Maya watched him and thought about the man on the bus who had joked about a girl in the wrong uniform, and thought about these hands working now with total attention, and understood that this was what the training was actually for, underneath all the obstacle courses and the cold water and the timed navigation. For this, the moment when what you knew met what was needed. The medevac helicopter arrived 12 minutes after Doherty called the coordinates. Both recruits loaded. Both expected full recovery. The team stood on the cleared landing zone in the broken light, watching the helicopter bank south, and nobody spoke for a moment because there was a particular kind of silence that followed the successful completion of something real. And people who had experienced it before recognized it, and people who had not experienced it before recognized it too. Haskell was standing close, not encroaching, close in the way of a man who had something to say and had run out of positions from which not to say it. They were standing apart from the others. The hillside dropped away behind them toward the distant gleam of the Pacific. "You run like her," Haskell said. Maya did not respond. "Not the physical mechanics, the way you decide." He was looking at the place where the helicopter had been, the empty piece of squarity. Sandra never hesitated, not because she was impulsive, because she had done the assessment before the moment arrived. By the time the moment came, the decision was already made. He was quiet for a moment that had weight in it. "She was not wrong about the building," he said. The wind moved through the scrub. "She gave me the assessment 3 times, 3 separate occasions. She had photographic evidence of the charge placement. She had the schematic. She had 2 exfil routes that avoided the approach corridor entirely." He stopped. "I kept the original plan because changing it would have looked like I was deferring to a female officer. And I had decided before I ever looked at the evidence that deferring to her would mean something about me." Maya was still. "That is what I did," Haskell said. "Not a tactical error, not competing intelligence assessments. I dismissed accurate information delivered by a qualified officer because accepting it conflicted with a story I was telling about what authority looked like. The ocean was barely visible at the base of the hills, a line of silver at the edge of the world. She pulled me out first," he said. "You know that." "I know. I was closest to the blast point. I was the first one down. She came in and got me and went back in twice more." He stopped. "She had already told me I was wrong about the building, and she got me out of the building first." The silence between them was full of 2 years and what they had contained. "I have spent 26 months constructing reasons," Haskell said. "Reasons why the decision was defensible. Reasons why the official report was a reasonable representation of complex operational reality. None of them are true. They are all management, ways of managing the weight so I could continue to function." Maya said, "What do you want to do with it?" He looked at her. For the first time since he had arrived at this base, he looked directly at her. Not the assessing look of an adversary. Just looking. The way people looked at each other when they had stopped performing. "There is a folder in my vehicle," he said. "I have been carrying it for 8 months. It contains the original Syria report, the pre-revision version, and a documented account of the communication chain through which the revision was requested and executed. The names, the timeline, the specific language used to pressure me to accept the revised version. He paused. I didn't create it to use it. I created it because I needed to know I could, that I hadn't completely surrendered the truth. And now, Maya said, now I would like to give it to Admiral Bennett. Maya looked at the place where the helicopter had been. Then let's go do that, she said. The meeting in Admiral Bennett's conference room had the quality of certain kinds of conclusions, not dramatic, not loud, but carrying the weight of everything that had been moving toward this point for a long time. Bennett, Shaw, Doherty, Maya, Haskell. Haskell put the folder on the table the way you put something down when you were done carrying it. Bennett opened it, read in silence. Shaw read over his shoulder. Her expression did not change, but something in her posture shifted when she reached the second page. Doherty sat with his hands flat on the table and looked at Haskell with the evaluating look of a man who had been in the Navy for 50 years and had seen most of the ways people could fail and most of the ways they could try to recover from it. When Bennett finished, he set the folder down. This implicates a 3-star, he said. Yes, sir. You understand what follows. I am prepared to stop being unprepared for it, Haskell said. That is the honest version of the answer. Bennett studied him for a moment with the weighing look of 40 years of assessing people. Then he nodded once, the nod of a man who had made a judgment and was moving forward. He looked at Haskell. There is something you asked to share with Commander Calloway directly. Go ahead. Haskell looked at his hands for a moment, then at Maya. Her last transmission, he said. Sandra's, the final radio contact before she entered the building. He paused. The official record contains the operational content coordinates entry, planned communication protocol. What it does not contain is the last thing she said. The room was very still. I have had this in my memory for 2 years. I didn't include it in any report because it was personal and because I didn't want anything personal in a record I was already distorting. He looked at Maya. She said, Brett, whether you hear me on this assessment or not, this is my job. I know what my job is, and I do it well. The window showed a rectangle of California sky and the distant edge of the water. She was not angry when she said it, Haskell said. She was not frightened. She was not making a point for the record. She said it the way someone said something that was simply true about themselves. As a statement of fact. He stopped. She walked into that building knowing she was right and knowing I had not listened and knowing she was still going to do her job as well as it could possibly be done. Maya looked at the table, then the window, then at Haskell. She knew who she was, Maya said. She knew exactly who she was. The room held that for a moment. Doherty reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and set something quietly on the table in front of him. A coin worn smooth by decades of handling its surface faded to suggestion by 30 years of contact. He did not say anything. He left it there. Maya looked at it. The date on the surface, 1994. Sandra's BUD/S year. She understood that this moment was not yet that moment. That moment was coming, but it was not this one. She looked at Bennett. The evaluation is complete, she said. The data is documented. 47% initial bias based on appearance. This bias persisted an average of 3.2 days despite contrary performance evidence. Blind assessment protocols improved evaluation accuracy by 61%. I am prepared to deliver the full report. We will receive it, Bennett said, with the full weight it deserves. He paused. And Commander, the 4 civilians from the Marigold are expected to make complete recoveries. All 4. Thank you, sir. Captain Shaw found Maya in the corridor outside the conference room. She said, Garrett Pierce, I thought you should know. Maya waited. The cardiac evaluation confirmed what you identified. Obstructive HCM, same presentation as his brother. He's been referred to a surgical specialist at Balboa Naval Hospital. The procedure has a high success rate. Shaw paused. He also submitted a formal application to the Naval Special Warfare Medical Oversight Program. He wants to work on updating the pre-enrollment screening protocols, the ones that didn't catch his brother. Maya looked at the wall for a moment. He is finishing what Daniel started, she said. In his own way, Shaw said. Yes. The graduation was held on a Thursday morning, the kind of California morning that made the state's reputation warm light, clear air, the Pacific showing blue-green through the gaps between buildings. 14 recruits in formation. Families in the stands, having traveled considerable distances, carrying the specific mixture of pride and relief that families carried to these events after weeks of not quite sleeping. Raymond Hargrove sat in the front row, 78 years old, carrying himself with the particular straightness of a man whose spine had been shaped by years of formations like the one in front of him now. He wore his Vietnam service medals because his daughter-in-law had asked him to, and because he understood that she was right, and because there were occasions when the weight of what you had carried deserved to be made visible. He watched the formation with the careful attention of someone watching for something specific. He found Maya in the group of instructors and observers standing to the left of the graduation platform. He looked at her for a moment. He nodded once. She returned it. Bennett's remarks were brief because Bennett understood that the families had not traveled this distance to hear a speech. He talked about what training required and what it produced. He talked about the specific evaluation this cohort had participated in without operational details, with enough honest acknowledgement of what it had meant that the people who needed to hear it heard it. The statistics, when he cited them, landed the way numbers landed when the people listening had lived the experience behind them. 47% bias based on appearance, 3.2 days of persistence against contrary evidence, 61% improvement with blind assessment, not abstract. 3 days on a base in Coronado in October, and 14 people standing here instead of the 25 who had arrived and 4 people alive on dry land. He announced the Sandra Reeves Leadership Award. He explained who Sandra Reeves had been, not the official version, the version that was accurate. Ryan Hargrove walked forward with the bearing of a man thinking about a shoebox of letters in his parents' closet and what he owed to the people who had written them. He accepted the coin and shook Bennett's hand and turned and found Maya's eyes in the assembled company and held the eye contact for one moment that said something specific which neither of them could have reduced to language, but which was complete. Dana Mercer walked forward as she walked everywhere with absolute economy of movement and the awareness of someone who was always on some level still reading the room. She held the coin in her palm and looked at it for a moment in the way people looked at small things that contained large things. Marcus Briggs walked forward with the slightly self-conscious bearing of a man who had not spent much of his life being recognized by institutions. He shook Bennett's hand firmly. He looked at the coin. He put it in his left chest pocket, where it would stay for years through deployments and difficult days and the particular private moments when people reached for things that reminded them who they had decided to be. When the formal ceremony concluded and the families came down from the stands and the parade ground filled with the noise of reunions, Doherty crossed to where Maya was standing. He produced the coin again, the 1994 BUD/S coin, worn smooth. He held it out. Maya took it, felt the weight of it, the warmth it had carried from his pocket. One side showed what might once have been a date and a name, the surface worn to suggestion. The other side showed an image that age had softened, but not erased a hand reaching down to grip another hand reaching up. No words, just the image. She carried that through Bud/S, Doherty said, through every deployment after, through everything. He paused. In 2008, when she was at Little Creek doing her evaluation work, she took it out one evening and looked at it for a long time. I asked her what she was thinking about. He stopped. She said she was thinking about the person she was going to give it to, that she hadn't met her yet, but that she would. Maya closed her hand around the coin. She gave it to me 6 months before Syria, Doherty said. She said she had a feeling it was getting close to time to pass it forward. He paused. She was right about that too. Holt appeared at Maya's side a few minutes later, while the crowd was still thick with families. He did not preface what he said. Commander, I was wrong about you from the first moment I saw you. Not about your capability. I recognized that almost immediately. I was wrong in the way that mattered more. I chose what was comfortable over what was right. I knew what the evaluation was, I knew who you were, and I chose my ease over your mission. He paused. That is not the officer I have spent 27 years trying to be. I am sorry for it. He extended his hand. Maya shook it. From this day, Holt said, no candidate comes through my facility and has to prove they belong before they are given the chance to treat my. That is the change. That is what I can do. He held her gaze. I will not waste it. 6 months later, the bus came through the main gate on a Thursday afternoon in April, the kind of California afternoon that made the state's reputation warm light, clear air of the Pacific showing blue-green through the gaps between buildings. 23 new recruits. They stepped off the bus with the particular mixture of determination and barely managed fear that had characterized every group that had ever arrived at this facility, that would characterize every group that arrived in the future, because the mixture was not weakness. It was an accurate assessment of what they had gotten themselves into. Among them, stepping off toward the back of the group, a young woman with blonde hair pulled back in a regulation style, small-framed. She looked around at the facility with eyes that were taking in the obstacle courses and the water and the guard towers and organizing what she saw with the precise attention of someone who had been preparing for a long time. The two men who stepped off before her had already begun to whisper. It was not hostile. It was not even fully conscious. It was the reflex of people who had been taught by 1,000 small repeated signals to see certain things as signals and respond to them in certain ways. The whisper was the sound of a story that had been told so many times it had sunk below the level of intention and was now just the water they swam in, invisible to them, the way water was invisible to the things that lived in it. Warren Holt came out of the administrative building. He was carrying an equipment, properly fitted equipment, not the smallest available, which was what this facility had been handing out for years because no one had thought to do the arithmetic in advance. He had looked at the roster that morning, noted the smallest measurements on the list, and requisitioned the correct gear before the bus arrived. This was a small thing. It was also not a small thing. He stopped in front of the young woman with the blonde hair. He looked at her with the professional attention of a man whose job was to see what people were capable of and who had learned at considerable cost in a conversation on a dock in the dark with the ocean, doing what the ocean always did to make sure that the seeing came before the judging. Welcome to Naval Special Warfare Training. He held out the gear. What size do you need? No hesitation? No pause in which the offer might be reconsidered? No weight of assessment behind the question? No check of her frame against some internal measurement of plausibility? Just the question, said in the tone of someone for whom the answer, whatever it was, would be met with what it required. The two men who had been whispering had gone quiet. The young woman told him her size. Holt handed her the gear. She took it the way you took something given to you correctly without the specific exhaustion of having had to explain that you deserved it, and she walked toward the barracks building as the afternoon light came off the Pacific in long gold lines, and the flags moved in the ocean breeze, and the facility went about its business of turning people into something more than what they had been. In a helicopter somewhere over the high desert flying back from a location that would not appear in any document available to the public, Maya Calloway sat against the aircraft's frame with her knees up and her head back and the specific tiredness of completed work settling through her, the way serious tiredness settled, not collapsing, but releasing the body finally permitted to inventory what it had spent. The operation had run 41 hours. High-value target, civilian protection component, mixed team, no casualties. The objectives achieved in the order of priority that Sandra had taught her to assign them: the people first. The mission second, because the people were also the mission, and forgetting that was how you lost both. She reached up and touched the three things hanging around her neck. Her own dog tags, warm from her skin. Sandra's dog tags, warm from her skin. The coin, BUD/S 1994. Its surface smooth from 30 years of hands, the image on its reverse, one hand reaching down, one hand reaching up, worn to a suggestion of itself, but still legible to someone who knew what they were looking at. Outside the helicopter, the desert moved below at altitude, brown and red and vast, indifferent to the small metal thing moving through the air above it, carrying its cargo of tired people who had done a hard thing and were returning. Maya looked at the tags in her hand. She thought about Sandra in the building in Syria, going in knowing she was right, and knowing she had not been heard and going in anyway and coming back out twice and going in a third time for the man who had not listened, because the work was the work regardless of who it was for or what they had done. She thought about Holt on the dock, in the dark sitting with the ocean, saying the true thing about the choice he had made and the choice he was making now. She thought about Haskell putting the folder on the table the way you put something down when you were done carrying it. She thought about Ryan Hargrove walking forward with the coin and the shoebox of letters, and 3 generations of men who had tried, in the question of what trying was actually for. She thought about Marcus Briggs putting the coin in his left chest pocket where it would stay. She thought about Garrett Pierce sliding his brother's photograph back into his own left chest pocket and saying he would talk to the medical officer, and the way that sentence sounded like the beginning of something rather than the end. She thought about the blonde woman stepping off the bus in April. She thought about the question, what size do you need? Simple enough that the simplicity was the point. You did not need a policy or a program or an evaluation or a report, though all of those things mattered and had their place and would be read and cited and would change things in ways that were real and measurable and would last. You needed to hand someone the gear they actually needed and ask the question in a way that had already decided what the answer was going to be treated as, which was information. Just information, with which to do the work. The helicopter banked. The desert tilted into sky, and then sky tilted back into desert. Maya held the tags against her chest. She said what she said, in moments like this, quietly into the ambient roar of the aircraft in the space between the end of one thing and the beginning of the next. Every day, Sandra, she said, every single day. The helicopter flew on. The desert moved below. The tags were warm in her hand. And somewhere in Coronado on a parade ground where the flags moved in the ocean breeze, and the Pacific stretched to the horizon in its patient and enormous way, a young woman in properly fitted gear walked toward whatever she was going to become, carrying nothing heavier than what she had brought with her, which was everything she would need.